It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. If this is the first time you're listening to our show, if it's a new station, please visit oppermanreport.com and check out our members section and all the exclusive content that we have there just for members who subscribe to the show. Also, if you have guest suggestions or topics, you want to send me a line, it's oppermanreport@gmail.com. We got a really special show today. We have Dr. Jeffrey Caufield. Now, we had just recorded a show with Dr. Caufield about a week ago, and it was such a great show and such great content. This is about his new book, General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy, the extensive new evidence of a radical right-wing conspiracy. And there was a problem with the audio, and we lost the whole first hour of the show. But I felt it was such an important show that we had to get Dr. Caufield back here as quickly as we could. And thank you so much, Doctor, for coming back and giving me a second chance here to record this properly. So, Doctor, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Ed.
Okay, great. Now, can you tell us about yourself? Who is Dr. Jeffrey Caufield?
I'm an emergency medicine physician from Cleveland, Ohio, and an author and researcher.
Now, this is your first book.
Yes, it is.
But you've been investigating the Kennedy assassination mostly. That's your focus?
That's correct.
For how many years?
At least 30. I began casually, and then I started concentrating, narrowing down, and making many, many trips to Dallas, New Orleans, which is where Oswald spent the summer of '63. I investigated the people behind him in New Orleans. I also spent a huge amount of time at the National Archives. There's 6 million documents there on the Kennedy assassination. And I also liberally use the Freedom of Information Act to gain tens of thousands of documents from the FBI. So my book is quite a bit different than the many, many that have been released over the last decades, and that this one is not a rehash of the same old evidence with a different spin to it. This is extensive new evidence. Most of this hasn't been seen before, and it is explosive.
I would agree, because we had a long discussion last time, and the amount of research and documentation you've provided here is very impressive. The book is General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy, the extensive new evidence of a radical right conspiracy. There's a link on the OppermanReport.com website in the bookstore, and there's also a link on the blog, Opperman Report blog. You also have a website called JeffreyCaufield.com. That's a CAUFIELD.com, and you can also purchase the book there directly from Dr. Caufield. So give us an idea now. Who was General Walker?
Well, first of all, General Walker is an official part of the Kennedy assassination story. Most of us remember that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was supposedly a lone communist, killed President Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. 2 days later, Jack Ruby killed him, and the Warren Commission investigated it and determined that Oswald acted alone and that Jack Ruby was also acted alone and was not a part of the conspiracy. Now, the part where General Walker comes in, after the assassination, we learned that Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly took a shot at General Walker at his home in Texas, firing over a back fence into Walker's den where he was supposedly working on his taxes. Well, that story has a lot of problems. First of all, Walker and President Kennedy hated each other. The second problem is that the neighbor, the kid next door, a 14-year-old boy, was standing in an open doorway gazing over to the Walker property when the shot rang out and two men ran across the street where their cars are parked, one of them apparently with the rifle, and these two men looked back and saw this kid, and after the murder of President Kennedy, the kid, he came out earlier and told the police what he saw, but the kid said, no, neither of these men were Oswald. The problem is Oswald didn't drive, and now we have two men on the scene, and another problem comes out later that there are credible allegations that these two men were General Walker's own men. Both allegations claim that these men drove Oswald over to the Walker's house. There are many, many, many significant problems with Walker's story. One of the policemen who came out that night to talk to Walker determined Walker made the whole thing up, and it was just a publicity stunt. So it's worth taking a look at who was General Edwin Walker. Walker was a hero in World War II in Korea. When he came back, he became a fan of Joseph McCarthy and his communist inquisitions. And Walker, like a lot of people during this period called the Red Scare, during the Cold War, were of the opinion, like McCarthy, that our government and our churches, our labor unions, our university faculty had been infiltrated by the communists. So the other thing about Walker is, besides being an anti-communist, he was a white supremacist. And this got him into some trouble. In 1957, of all people, he was assigned to command troops at Little Rock during the desegregation crisis. President Eisenhower had sent troops to Little Rock to enforce the Constitution's decision in 1954, the Brown decision that outlawed segregation. Well, Walker didn't want anything to do with it, and he resigned. He resigned his position as a major general, but the Pentagon wouldn't hear of it, refused to accept his resignation. Walker had to serve at Little Rock, and he despised it. After Little Rock, he became one of the earliest members of the John Birch Society, which was this McCarthy-esque society that saw communists everywhere. He was reassigned to Germany in 1960 to command the 24th Infantry, which is a very high post. In 1961, he began indoctrinating his troops with this radical John Birch Society kind of indoctrination. And during one of his speeches, he accused former President Harry Truman of being pink or nearly red, or nearly being a red communist, but not quite. Well, that got him into trouble. When the radical right here in the States heard about it, they came to his aid. They told Walker they were going to make him a leader of the national radical right in the States, and they were going to give him a salary. Well, they deliberated on what Walker had done, and they decided he was insubordinate. President Kennedy then relieved him of his command, which is a huge thing because that had not been done since Truman relieved MacArthur of his command for almost trying to get the United States into a war with China. And it hadn't been done since Walker was relieved until more recently with the relief of General McChrystal by President Obama. So early on, we have Walker as with a political agenda. He's a troublemaker in Little Rock, and then in the Army, and he gets the boot. So he comes back to the States. All the racist senators get behind him, like Strom Thurmond, etc. They hold hearings trying to, validate his actions, which they couldn't. Walker decides to resign. So he says, I'm going to resign because the battle now is at home against the communists. And he goes on a speaking engagement. His rhetoric is so harsh, so threatening, he earns a cover of Newsweek magazine entitled Thunder on the Right, with Walker pictured in his general's uniform. They sensed that this guy was very, very extreme and even to the point might be dangerous. So that's in the late 1961. So in 1962, he speaks all over the country, everywhere, to national audiences, claiming that communists were everywhere and that the Kennedy administration was facilitating this communist infiltration all over in high office, in labor and industry, etc. And Kennedy wasn't doing anything about it. He was appeasing the Russians. He was, of course, he was weak in Cuba and allowed the communists to take over there. So this is all part of what we call the Red Scare. This was during the Cold War, and Walker became a Cold Warrior when he resigned the Army. In the fall of 1962, a very, very important event happened. The University of Mississippi was going to be integrated by an African-American named James Meredith. Well, the South wanted nothing to do with it. The South was armed for civil war after the Brown decision in 1954. They had managed by state law and all other forms of resistance to halt integration attempts. Well, Eisenhower had enough. He said, they were the Mississippi was in violation. They were going to admit them. And they sent the U.S. Marshals down to forcefully admit James Meredith. Well, Walker had a different idea. Walker took the stage, and he told them he is going to Mississippi to defend the governor and the Southern way of life, and he wanted 10,000 men from every state to join him. Well, it happened. Walker goes down to the University of Mississippi. The U.S. Marshals are lined up in riot regalia, waiting to enroll the student. Walker shows up and incites a riot. During that riot on the evening of September 30th, 1962, 2 men are killed, 35 marshals are wounded. President Kennedy stayed up all night monitoring the situation on the phone with the governor of Mississippi, and he finally had enough, and he orders the arrest of General Walker. So this is Kennedy's second confrontation with Walker. And remember, Walker is a part of the assassination story of President Kennedy.
Right.
So U.S. Marshals place Walker on arrest. They fly him to Springfield mental facility, which was Walker and the radical right thought was a insult. In other words, they were insinuating he was crazy. And he faced 30 years in prison for insurrection against the United States government. Very, very serious charge. Well, as it happened in 1960s, he went before a all-white grand jury, and they were sympathetic to Walker and for, trying to save the Southern way of life, and acquitted him. was that easy. So now we have a very, very angry General Walker, 1962. So at that same time, the FBI learns, and this is important, and this has never been disclosed before. I found this evidence in documents I requested by Freedom of Information Act from the FBI, and I had not seen these documents before, even though I had seen related documents in the National Archives. For some reason, these were not publicly available. And the story goes like this. There were a group of radicals in Miami, Florida, and they came up with a plan. They decided if they could murder all these supposed communists in government, in industry, in the schools, at the universities, in the labor union, they had an extensive list, then they could prevent a communist takeover. And they firmly believe this. And Walker said it. He said the communists are getting closer and closer to taking over. And Kennedy was not doing anything about it. And he said this constantly. Kennedy was letting it happen. So they developed this plan for assassination squads. And when the time came and they felt the communist takeover was imminent, then these assassination squads would begin and eliminate these people, and they'd save the country. Well, they had what was called a high military command of former military individuals, including Walker, that were to give the order to begin these killings when they felt the communist threat was imminent. And these are all in FBI files. What happened was the FBI had a reliable informant inside this group. He was a high-ranking member of the radical right. He had infiltrated the highest levels of the Klan, and he had been giving reliable information to the FBI since 1949 and was never known to give them anything misleading. So he tells them about this in December of 1962. Well, the FBI doesn't apparently do anything. So the months pass, and this group and its affiliate held a meeting in New Orleans of the radical right called the Congress of Freedom. And I'll remind the audience that New Orleans, of course, is where Oswald spent the summer of '63. It's where he was born and raised. So Oswald at that time was in Texas. So they hold this meeting in April. And so this informant hears the same people, and they were deadly serious, talking about this plan to eliminate all these people in high places in the United States. And they circulated around a book with a whole list of scores of names, and one individual marked those who should be assassinated with a priority. But the important thing here is this was to be directed by this hardcore, underground, high military command, and we know who's on it. And I could not find that General Walker was a part of it until much, much, much later, because all of the documents I had seen that had mentioned these commanders were Walker's name was blacked out. In other words, they took a magic marker, the FBI, and just blacked it out. It wasn't until I got a kind of similar Freedom of Information request from the FBI that the same document naming these generals who were going to, lead this assassination, that I found Walker's name, and there it was. So Walker's a part of this story. And it even gets better. I found another general, Pedro de Valle, a lieutenant general, another hero in World War II. Del Valle left some of his papers to posterity at the University of Oregon, and it's quite stunning. He left several where he and General Walker are discussing the need to organize and do something about this imminent perceived takeover of the country by Kennedy and the communists. And they said, in one letter, he tells Walker, he says, so I think this is the last measure we take until we resort to violence. And this is, and Pedro de Valle is one of these people known to the FBI to be in the high command with Walker. And here these two men are discussing this in these letters, which some of which I've reproduced in the book. I've also reproduced the FBI document that shows that Walker was in the high command. So how did the FBI react? They went around and interviewed the lowest, most meaningless figures connected to these plots, but never Walker or any of the, well-known former military involved. And these people told the FBI, oh, no, we had nothing to do with it. We weren't planning on killing anybody. And that was it. And they abandoned that plot, understandably, because the FBI knew all about it. And they now knew that they had an informant in their midst. So, do you follow me so far, Ed?
Yes, absolutely. This is fascinating.
All right. So, Walker continues on speaking all over the country. He speaks to segregationist groups largely in the South, but also John Birch-type meetings. And these are well attended. They're coast to coast. He speaks before thousands. He spoke with another congressman. Walker has accumulated some power and a considerable following.
Let me ask you a question real quick. In this timeline, where does it fit in when he ran for governor of Texas?
Oh, okay. He ran for governor of Texas in 1962, early in the primary, and he lost. The idea was he had a significant following. The idea that if he could win the governor's race in Texas, it would be a springboard to the presidency, and therefore he would have a way to defeat Kennedy with a ballot. It never happened. He finished sixth in a field of six in the primary. So, that pretty much did it for any legitimate political aspirations.
Okay.
So, we are now in 1963, and in October, another meeting of these radical right-wingers, some included some very, very violent men, and this meeting was held in Indianapolis, and the informant is there again. Things turned out different. At this meeting, no longer were they talking about assassination squads and these individuals. They were talking about killing the president. And this informant told the FBI, said, "You can mark my words. I'll put my head on the chopping block that some murders are going to occur." This is 6 weeks before President's murder. And not known if there's any response to that at all from the FBI. I saw none. Well,
what do you think? The FBI was going along with it? They were encouraging it, or they just didn't care, or they would be sloppy?
I really can't say objectively why they were doing it. I don't think it was sloppy because these were violent people. These were famous generals. I did an extensive FBI Freedom of Information Act request on General Walker, and I mean we have, I'm guessing, 3,000 documents. None of it relates to these assassination meetings. Not any of it. And I can't explain it other than to say that you certainly have to consider that J. Edgar Hoover deliberately concealed this. How could the FBI not investigate these people? There's never been anything like this, to my knowledge, in the history of America. where you have these people, many of them influential, these very high-ranking former military men, involved in this. It's unprecedented. And why they didn't investigate it, why isn't it mentioned, didn't it show up in Walker's FBI file? Or the other general's FBI file? It's just astounding to me. My own personal opinion, I think that, J. Edgar Hoover's thoughts on communism and on race were the same as Walker's.
Right.
It was Hoover who was responsible for the Red Scare and for Joe McCarthy and for this belief that communists were ever. That was J. Edgar Hoover. He's the man responsible for that. And he was also a racist. The FBI was all white up until he had to, admit one FBI agent, I believe it's a chauffeur.
Yeah.
And I just think that he was not interested. He's looking at communists. Most of the FBI's job was to ferret out communists, not to investigate crimes. And I will say can't say for sure, but his aims were very much in sympathy with General Walker's, and I think he, at best, let it go. At worst, he concealed this. He just, deep sixed the evidence. But I don't know. I cannot say for sure. But it is suspicious. It is terribly suspicious. If it was by mistake, it was a terrible mistake. It should never have happened. But I doubt it. So this man who's been shooting his mouth off, who we get most of this information from, is a character named Joe Miltier from Georgia. He's as violent of a man as this informant had ever known, and he'd known a lot of them. He had known Klan murderers, bombers, and so forth. He called this man violent, but he was a good source of information, and he is the leak in the conspiracy. This man was so violent that after the Birmingham Baptist Church was bombed on September 15th, 1963, and 4 little black girls were murdered. President Kennedy and the whole world really was outraged, and he told Hoover, I don't care what it takes, find out who did this horrible crime. The whole world is awaiting. So this informant, who is close to this violent man, who had been his principal leak and telling him about these murders, these of individuals discussed in late '62, early '63, he decides that the FBI wants him to find out from the same person who was behind the Birmingham bombing. So they arrange a hidden tape recorder in the informant's apartment, and this man, Miltier, the violent man, is invited over, and the two of them proceed to talk, and the informant is trying to pull from him if he knew who was behind the bombing of the church. So in a long tape conversation, all of a sudden, the conversation turns to President Kennedy. And he says, well, they're talking. They say, President Kennedy's coming to town. They're talking Miami, which he visited about a week before he was murdered in Dallas. He says, yeah, he better watch himself. Oh, what do you mean by that? And he explains, a guy like that, it's easy enough to get to him. And they go, well, what do you mean? This is the informant trying to pull information. He was taken off guard by this. He says, well, how do you figure you would do something like that? He says, it's easy. We would do it from a tall office building with a high-powered rifle that you could knock down afterwards, and then they'd have a patsy that they could pick up just to throw the authorities off. 13 days before the assassination. Well, the Miami Secret Service learned of this, and they canceled Kennedy's parade in Miami in his open motor car. No one told Dallas. No one told Dallas. But the story gets better. This violent person, Miltier, who's leaking this, calls the informant and taunts him. He said, he calls him from Texas on the morning of the murder and says, your boy's coming down to Texas, and you won't be seeing him again. And at about noon, Kennedy's shot. This man then calls back. The informant says, see, it happened just like I said it would. And the informant says, were you guessing? He says, no, I don't do any guessing. We later come to find out that the informant asked this violent man, he said to him, were you the one who did the shooting? And he said, no, I didn't do any shooting, but I didn't mind watching it. So we later, years later, we have an ambitious reporter looking at all the photos in Dealey Plaza, and he happened to pay a visit to this, this violent individual's home in around 1975. A couple of years after he died, he gained access to the house, and he looked around. He found photos of this man who knew about the assassination in advance, and it's kind of miraculous he did this, but he actually finds a picture of this man, the inside leak, standing in Dealey Plaza along the motorcade in the plaza. During President Kennedy drove right by him.
Because Miltier had this
later had his head shut off.
Miltier had this photo displayed in his home?
He had him. He was a bit of a hoarder. He had just hundreds of documents everywhere. He kept carbon copies of his letters, and said they were all over the place. But his family photos. This reporter named Dan Christensen, he gains access, and he sees these photos, and it's obviously our man Milter, the guy who's the leak into this conspiracy. And he takes them with him in a large box of letters and certain things that he deemed valuable. There's so much there, he could hardly take it all. He just happens to see this guy, and he's a dead ringer for Milter, the guy who said he was in Texas, said he watched the motorcade, and there he's in the motorcade. Well, I mean, it's stunning evidence there. Well, the American people were not pleased with the Warren Commission, and I think 90% or so today do not believe it. So,
well, you know what? Before we transition to the Warren Commission, let's take a commercial break, okay? It's a 3-minute break.
Okay, fine.
And
sure.
Remember, if you talk in the background, the audience will hear you talking. We'll be right back with more of Dr. Jeffrey H. Caufield. His website is jeffreycaufield.com, where you can purchase the book from him directly. The name of the book is General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy, The Extensive New Evidence of a Radical Right Conspiracy. One quick question before we go. How much of your own funds have you spent investigating this portion of the Kennedy assassination on General Walker?
I'd rather, I've spent probably hundreds of thousands. I'm a man of means, and I made so many trips and flew so many places. It just thousands and many tens of thousands, I'm sure.
It's very impressive. Okay, thank you so much for coming back. We're going to take a little commercial break. We'll be back with more of Dr. Jeffrey H. Caufield. And now a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Dr. Jeffrey H. Caufield. The name of the book is General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy, the Extensive New Evidence of a Radical Right Conspiracy. So, Dr. Walker, Dr. Caufield, you were telling us about the Warren Commission.
Okay. So here we have this man tells us exactly 13 days in advance exactly how the assassination was to happen, and in the exact manner it actually did happen. Well, the FBI never told the Warren Commission one single thing about it. Nothing. And we discussed earlier how they failed to tell the Warren Commission about those earlier broad-based assassination plans that they broke up, even though they were to be led by these very well-known, famous American generals, including General Walker, who, as I mentioned, is a part of the assassination stick. And here's a man who says he's in Texas that day, calls after the assassination, affirms that what he said 13 days earlier came true, and the Warren Commission never heard a word of it. So we talked about, could this be inadvertent? And if anybody thinks this is inadvertent, or possibly could be, I'd really like to hear the explanation for it. I can't conceive of any explanation for why the Warren Commission that is charged with investigating the murder did not hear any word of this from the FBI. I can only deduce that this is deliberate concealment by the FBI.
Now Walker did testify before the Warren Commission, but only regarding this wild theory that Oswald shot at him.
Right. Well, that's another problem for Oswald. And the Warren Commission should have had that information. They should have said, well, first of all, let's discuss, General Walker, this group that you were involved in on these broad-based assassination squads where you were going to have squads of men go out and shoot people in business and industry, that also included civil rights leaders and prominent Jewish individuals. General Walker, let's discuss that. That started in 1962, and our reliable informant told us about it. And then again, this man, whose name is Miltier, he told an informant exactly how it happened. But they didn't. They never did. But you know what the FBI did? Although very smart on Uber's part, when the Warren Commission went to press in September, and the pages of their report are rolling off, the Warren Commission did take this information to the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission said, "Oh, we're done. We're over. We're disbanded." They took this information and never looked at it, and I can't tell you exactly who was in it. I mean, it might have been without Walker's being mentioned. And they took it over to the National Archives where it was buried. Mm. So this murder should have never happened. After that informant learned that it was in the works from one of the most violent men in America, that these people had been up to it before, they were deadly, deadly serious, and it happened just the way they said it.
Let me back up a bit again. But now Oswald, this allegation that he was the shooter in the Walker attempted assassination.
Right.
That came out how? Because of Marina?
Yeah, around the murder was on November 22nd. On November 6th, Marina came out and says, "Hey, my husband told me he did the shooting of Walker." But that there's a lot of problems with that. I mentioned them before. The kid next door was watching. Two men who weren't Oswald ran off, and but it gets worse. So Walker, the world doesn't know that right after the assassination, that Oswald supposedly shot at Walker, and Walker pretends he doesn't know. First he says, "Well, communists did it." Well, there are not many communists in Dallas. I think the FBI determined there were 4 known communists because they had an informant in the group. Anyhow, the day after the assassination, Walker's in Shreveport. Actually, 2 days after, he's in Shreveport. He gets a phone call at his hotel from a German newspaper. Keep in mind, he was in Germany in 1962. They asked Walker, who shot it? Who do you think shot at you? And he goes, "I think Oswald did. I believe Oswald did it." Well, the rest of the world didn't know that. Walker knew it before anybody else, and he early in the year, he said he didn't know who did it. But now Oswald did it. Well, the Warren Commission called Walker to testify about the shooting, and Walker, he says, "Well, listen, you told this German newspaper that Oswald did. How could you know that?" And he says, and he vigorously denies it. He vigorously denies it, and the Warren Commission, I believe it was Wesley Lieber, he's scratching his head and says, "Well, this paper is printed before Marina Oswald told us that her son shot at him." And then he said, "Well, gee, I don't know. Maybe the newspaper was post-dated." Well, I have the newspaper. It's not post-dated, or is it predated? Anyhow, they made an excuse for it. They were helping Walker out, weed a lot of this. Well, as it turns out, and this is an extensive part of my book, I spend a great deal of time and space in the book talking about the people behind Lee Harvey Oswald in Louisiana in the summer of '63. And guess what, folks? They're all close associates of General Walker. This man in Louisiana, who Congress's committee in 1977, when they reinvestigated the assassination, even they determined that Lee Harvey Oswald had an association with Guy Bannister. What they failed to show was that Guy Bannister and General Walker and people in Guy Bannister's operation were right-wing extremists like Walker and were close friends to Walker. So it doesn't make any sense that Walker or Oswald, who we know was working with Guy Bannister, would want to kill his close associate. It doesn't make any sense. And then you take this together with the gaffe that Walker made by saying that Oswald was involved before he could have known it, in addition to the problems at the scene witnessed by a boy, in addition to allegations that came out that Walker's own men did the shooting, and even a policeman said it was for publicity. After all, that was when Walker was running for governor. And so he could have gained some attention. He's saying the communists shot at me and so forth. But they let him off the hook. His attorney was also a general, former general in the Army, was part of the military command of those earlier assassination plots as well. But they let him off. And so it gets better. One of Walker's employees comes forth and says to the Secret Service, General Walker, lived with General Walker in the early, late 62, early 63, and 3 times I saw Jack Ruby visit the house, one time with a member of the John Birch Society. Stunning allegation. Now we have a relationship with Oswald of Walker. We have a relationship with Walker and the people behind Oswald in New Orleans, and now we have a relationship or an alleged relationship with Walker and Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, the man who supposedly shot and killed Oswald. So
well, wait a
we
second,
can
Dr. Caufield,
talk a little bit about Jack Ruby.
You don't question the fact that Ruby shot Oswald?
No.
Okay.
What did I say?
You kind of said supposedly, but that was a real left word. That was a real left.
I meant that. Yeah, right. I meant that Oswald shot at Walker.
I know.
Right?
I know.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's there's been a lot of conspiracy theories, but there's been none to try to get Ruby off the hook for that shooting. But
yeah.
So this man comes forth and he says, "Okay, Ruby's there." And the Secret Service. This is stunning business here. Here we have this guy. This is making things tough for Walker here. So, they do a second interview, and this young man recants his story completely. And he tells him, no, I was just making that up. And then he also tells him, well, they said, why'd you change your story? He said, because I'm afraid of General Walker. And he had a right to be afraid of General Walker. He had an army of people that were the most murderous people in America behind him. And he should be scared. So he changes his story. And to make things, more interesting, he says, and trying to get as far away as humanly possible from his story and his fear of General Walker, he says, no, the man I saw was skinny with white hair. Well, if you saw a man who was skinny with white hair, you would have never come to the Secret Service in the first place and said that was Jack Ruby, because every person in the world knew at that time that Ruby had very dark hair that appears black on the black and white print of the day, and he was pudgy. So you have that allegation, but the cream of the topper for all of this is a document I found in Walker's own papers at the University of Texas. A lot of these people, like Walker and Pedro Del Valle, other prominent men of the radical right, they decided that all of their efforts were done in the quest to save the country, and that they were patriots. They were the true patriots. So because of that, they gave their papers to posterity. They all purged them. But Walker's papers are, I don't know how many. It took me 2 weeks to go through them. I don't know if there's 100,000 documents. They're mostly junk. They're mostly letters. Here's $10, General Walker, you're the greatest man, and saving the country and all this. He had a big following. It's just paper after paper. But, after about 10 days of doing this, I come upon a letter to Billy. Well, Billy is a close associate. And anytime you see a personal letter, which he purged virtually all of them, it's worth reading. So let me give you the background for this letter and this stunning admission. Jack Ruby was convicted quite handily of murdering Oswald. I won't try to get him out of that. And a jury finds him guilty, and he's going to go to the electric chair in Texas. So he lawyers up, and he eventually gets the conviction overturned because of publicity and a few other problems with the trial. And this is in 1965. So he is going to have the venue changed for his new trial to Wichita Falls, Texas. That's some 150 miles outside of Dallas, I believe. So the Wichita Falls sheriff comes to pick him up at the Dallas jail, and he says, this man is sick. He needs to be in the hospital. I'm not taking him to Wichita Falls. So they take him to the hospital, and they find he's got cancer, and they begin chemotherapy on him. Walker writes a letter to his friend Billy Hargis, very, very close man. I spent a lot of time with him. He's also close to the New Orleans people, that Guy Bannister's and others. There's no question about it. This is a network we're talking about here. They all knew each other. They were all playing for the same team. This guy, Miltier, who's leaking all this information, Walker, and these New Orleans people, all playing on the same team. Well, he writes this letter to Billy. He says, first he tells him, which is interesting, he says, Billy, George de Mohrenschildt has returned to Dallas. Well, who's George de Mohrenschildt? Well, when Oswald came back from Russia, he was befriended by George de Mohrenschildt, who happened to be Russian. But he was an anti-communist. And, of course, truth be told is that Oswald knew nobody who wasn't an anti-communist. The left never knew. On the left, they never knew Oswald. So he writes this letter. He says, we are watching him very carefully. Well, he'd written a letter to a friend before, I discovered, and he said he's watching Marina Oswald. We do not underestimate her. We watch her every move. And so Walker is watching these people who aren't connected to him, but they were connected with Oswald, and he's afraid of them. And so he puts them under surveillance. So that's how the letter starts out. And then he writes next, warning. Ruby, has got a new trial schedule, and he might talk. Breaking news. Ruby might talk. Warning. Ruby might talk. What does Walker need to be afraid of that? Well, in the book, even before I'd actually completed the book before I found this letter, I made out a case that Jack Ruby in his jail letters and remarks he said here was pointing to the radical right as putting him up to do the murder. He even points to the Minutemen and the Nazis. Well, Walker's top aide in Dallas happened to be a Minuteman and a Nazi, and I concluded that, he could be talking about this guy, but it's clear that Ruby admits that someone's putting him up. So if that's true, and you can look at the evidence and determine for yourself, if that's true, then we have, it's likely that Ruby knew things about, was put up to the murder. He's coerced. And Ruby said, because I'm sure that harm's going to come to my family and the Jewish people. And here Walker's top aide's a Nazi. And So he has a reason, because if if Ruby talks and tells him about Walker, Walker might take his place in the electric chair. So he goes on and he says, he vows that, in the letter, he vows that Ruby is not going to leave Dallas alive. And he says because if he leaves Dallas, the block is off. That's his expression. And I assume he means the gag. And we know that Jack Ruby said people at the jail had told him, warned him not to mention the John Birch Society, which Walker was the most famous member in Dallas of the John Birch Society. He goes, when the block is off, then there'll be no way to keep this from the radical right. And it's an astounding document. I published it in full in the appendix in the book, like I did anything that's important. Because, when you read a lot of these assassination books blaming this and that, they're poorly supported in evidence. If they happen to have an endnote or footnote, usually doesn't even tell you. They might say, oh, that's from the National Archives. So you can go to the National Archives and figure out which of the 6 million it comes from. In the book, General Walker, there's 4,000 endnotes. The documentation is so meticulous. And then, as I said, I often reproduce the document, so you don't have to say, well, is this guy pulling, our leg? Because, there's scores of these books out there, and you don't blame somebody else.
People should know that this book is 1,006 pages. Okay, it's 1,000 pages.
Well, and I tell you, each of these chapters could have been a book,
right.
And each of these chapters are stunning in themselves. I mean, there's a chapter with Lee Harvey Oswald and the Nazis. It sounds far-fetched. It's not. There's a chapter of him in a voting rights, procession up in by Baton Rouge. A huge chapter. There's so many different chapters from different angles of material never presented before. We see that Oswald's a phony communist, that he infiltrates groups on Tulane, that he infiltrates civil rights groups. All of this is new material, and it's rock-hard evidence. And it all fits because, Kennedy, they talk about motive, means, and opportunity. The people with the most motive, means, and opportunity were the radical right-wingers and the segregationists who shed blood at Ole Miss and all over the South in violence of the 60s, murdering, civil rights workers and so forth, bombing Jewish temples and this kind of thing. They had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. And the evidence, and this is new and it's overwhelming, is that General Walker was the mastermind of this, and this is a conspiracy from, Miami to Texas to New Orleans, and his close associates in New Orleans groomed Oswald, and especially in summer 1963, Walker was the mastermind and of the murder in Dallas, and there were several informants who came out later and said so, but everybody said, huh? I thought, it was, CIA, mafia, you pick, and...
well, what about the stuff you told me last time about that Ruby had pictures in his pocket?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Jack Ruby, on the night of the assassination, what does he do? At 4 a.m, He wakes up his roommate and says, "Let's go.
Yeah,
you know what,
Dr. Caufield? We're down to the last minute.
We got to pick up a camera, a Polaroid camera." And he goes. They drive at 4 a.m. to the John Birch Society billboard.
Dr. Caufield, let me interrupt you. We're down to not even 30 seconds. So why don't we stop this and then we'll record another 20 minutes. We can tie things up, okay? But we'll end the show now. We're here with Dr. Jeffrey Caufield. He's the author of General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy, the extensive new evidence of a right-wing conspiracy, a radical right conspiracy. I also want to point out, too, that we have a part 2 that's about 45 minutes that's available. I'm going to make that available to people, too, that we can tie all this in together. Dr. Caufield's website is jeffreycaufield.com, where you can pick up the book there. Otherwise, you can pick it up at oppermanreport.com. If we can do another little bit, 15, 20 minutes more after this, that'll be available on oppermanreport.com as well. Good night.